Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by Matthew Smith, Chief Learning Officer at McKinsey and Company. Welcome to the show, Matthew. How are you?
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
Nice to see you again, as always. I'm always jealous with your stand-up desk.
Yeah. Well, it's, we spend so much of our days sitting now. It's good to do once in a while a call standing up as well.
Yeah. And so for those that are listening, Matthew has a stand-up desk. And whenever we have a call, he's always energized, bouncing around because he's standing up and I'm sitting here in the chair. So I'm always jealous. I need to get the stand-up desk ready for our next call that we have. Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, happy to. So as you mentioned, Chris, right now I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at McKinsey. But if I rewind the tape a little bit, I've done something that I think not that many people do these days, which is I've actually been with the same organization for the last almost 16 years now. So I joined McKinsey back in 2005 and came in as a business analyst. So I grew up in the U.S. And studied political science. I thought I would go into politics before I got completely disillusioned with the idea of doing anything political, which I think happens to many people, and ended up joining McKinsey. And ironically enough, given what I'm doing now, the big part of the reason why I went to McKinsey in the first place was that I felt like it really put a focus on leadership development and building skills and creating an environment where people can grow. And especially as someone really just starting out my career, that was important to me, as I think it's important to a lot of people. And so I sort of went through the ranks here at McKinsey as a consultant and spent my first 10 years here serving clients. I did a lot of work on people-related topics, which again is a bit of a thread through my career and what I'm doing now. So I worked a lot on organizational transformations, organization design, talent strategies, that sort of work, mostly in the US, but also got a bit of a chance to travel around the world. And then a few years ago, when I was a partner serving clients, I moved into a new role, which was our global chief of staff. So I spent all of my time, I sort of pivoted from spending most of my time serving clients to now most of my time helping to manage our firm along with our managing partner, which is what we call our CEO and his leadership team. So I did that for a few years. And then for the last 2.5 years now, I've been our Chief Learning Officer, which means I'm responsible for our learning and development strategy for all of our 32,000 colleagues globally. I look after, how we think about developing our people, how we think about building the right learning experiences to help them grow, and then making sure those all get executed and that we're linking into our firm's overall strategy and the needs of our people. So that's a bit of the thumbnail sketch of the professional journey. And I'm based now with my family in Paris. So we moved from the Washington, D.C. area to Paris about 4 years ago and have been living here ever since.
Wow, what a journey!
Yeah.
Do you think on the topic of learning, right?
It's one of these things where you can have multiple careers even within the same organization, and that's kind of how I've felt about my journey. I'm doing something very different now than I was when I started out, even though it's still with McKinsey. Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask, because anyone that I speak to that's been in the company that long, it's because they've always feel like they're growing in different roles, even though they're in the same business, in the same business. There's so many different opportunities to keep them there. And it sounds like you've gone through your own journey from working, with clients and now being on the practitioner side within the organization as well. Was that a tough transition, or, going from working with clients to the internal, or do you feel like a lot of the principles and processes and the experience you had was transferable?
They're definitely different experiences. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a tough transition, but it was a learning curve. And exactly as you said, Chris, I think part of why I wanted to do that was, I think, we all know when we get to sort of a flattening of our growth curves, right? And for me, that's usually a signal that it's time to start exploring something different. And to date, all of those moves have been within McKinsey for me. But I think a big learning curve for me going into that role is, as in my case, a consultant working with a set of clients, in one, maybe two industries, and then trying to get up to speed on the whole breadth of what we do across McKinsey. I mean, we're in 70 different countries. We serve something like 11 or 12 different industry practices, really every geography. So it was a lot to learn. And that's also, as you said, part of what made it exciting, as well as, moving from doing, I would say, more sort of advisory work to now actually being responsible directly for the implementation. That was a big change as well.
Let's talk about intentional learning, because that's something you're really passionate about. First of all, what is intentional learning? And then how can people learn to learn more effectively?
Now, this is a topic, as you say, I'm very passionate about, and we just put out an article on it on the McKinsey Quarterly, which is our management journal within McKinsey. That's it's openly available if people want to take a look. The idea behind this concept of intentional learning that we developed came out really of looking at what were the barriers that were facing our clients, as well as, frankly, our own people, when it came to growth within an organization and learning new things, developing into bigger roles or different roles over time. And one thing we found is that, two people might be equally talented, or have equally great resumes or backgrounds. And then you start seeing separation over time in terms of their progression or their development. And if you look at that, a lot of it comes down to how effectively can you as an individual learn new things? How adaptable are you? How much can you grow? And how effective are you at that? And what my colleagues and I found as we were sort of, looking out and having a lot of conversations with people about this is, there's a lot out there, sort of telling people that they need to have a lifelong learning mindset, and you can't disagree with that. But I said there's got to be something more than just having the mindset here. What are the actual, I'm a practical guy, so like, what do people who are great at this do? What are the habits that they have that they practice on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis that make them better at it than the rest of us? And so we started a bit of a research effort looking into the literature on this and what are those elements, and kind of synthesizing together lots of different threads from different parts of research to say, what are the elements of a great learner? And how can we better teach people how to learn? So treat learning as a skill. And the reason that we ended up calling it intentional learning is that there was, maybe we can get into some of those habits in a minute, but underlying all of them was this foundation or this cross-cutting theme of intentionality. The idea that you have to not just want to be a lifelong learner, but you have to have some sort of sense of, what do I want to learn? What is my intention? What am I going to be focused on? And I think we all know where you put your focus, that drives a lot of things and outcomes in life. And it's the same with learning. So rather than leave that up to your organization or what you're told to do by your manager, the folks who are the best at this really are intentional about where they want to focus their learning, and then, put in place these set of habits that help them move towards that intention.
Well, let's jump straight into the habits. I'm sure people are eager to hear them.
There's lots of different ways you could cut it, but we ended up saying there are 2 core mindsets that you need to have, and then 5 core habits. And maybe I can run through them quickly, and then we can circle back and unpack them a little bit. The 2 mindsets, number 1 is growth mindset, which many of your listeners might be familiar with, coming out of the work of Carol Dweck and many others over the years. This idea that growth mindset it essentially means that I believe that I can get better at something, versus a fixed mindset which says, I believe that my capabilities in some given area are more or less fixed. And you can have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset about intelligence. You could have it about creativity. You can have it about any number of things. And the reason we start with this one is, as you might expect, having a growth mindset is sort of the barrier to entry for learning to happen. If you don't believe that you can get better at something, if you believe I'm just a bad public speaker and that's the way it is, you're not really going to get much better at it. But if you believe I'm not that skilled at this yet, but I could be, that creates a very different space for learning. So growth mindset is number one. The second mindset is curiosity. So you have to actually enjoy the process of exploring new things and looking into new ideas and getting excited about something and see where that goes. And for different people, different things spark their curiosity, but we actually do believe that this is a muscle that you can kind of build. And the more that you're curious about new opportunities and new ideas, the more motivation you're going to have for learning, right? So growth mindset more or less simplifies down to, I believe I can learn, and curiosity is the fuel, the motivation behind the learning. So those are the two core mindsets.
Love that. How do we kind of unlock intentionality and unlock? Can you change the mindset of someone? In terms of their growth mindset from fixed to growth?
No, absolutely. This is one of these things that can come across very much as, I better say I have a growth mindset about it because it sounds bad if I have a fixed mindset. We all have more, some areas where we might be more fixed, and that's okay. You have to be okay with that. Again, it's about this idea of how can you expand that field outward more and more and take a look at more and more things and say, actually, you know what? I do believe I could get better at that if I put the effort into it, right? It might be easier for some people, harder for others, but you have to believe that it can actually change and improve. And so that's why these are less, we didn't score these or categorize these so much as habits, because they're actually beliefs. They're beliefs that, and you can, like any belief or any mindset, you can practice it. There are things that you can do, but it's more mental practice versus something that happens, day to day in the real world that shows up as a habit. But I do 100% believe it. And part of building curiosity, by the way, it sounds like you don't need to build that as a muscle because you've got that in spades already. But some people may be saying, well, I'm not that curious, or I want to develop it. I think that you can be curious about anything. It doesn't have to be, because sometimes what kills curiosity is we believe it has to be in this area. Like it has to be these 3 goals that my manager set out, or this new program we're being asked to do. And maybe that doesn't get you jumping out of bed. But one thing that I like to do is just sort of a curiosity exercise is, walk down the street or in a store. And I know probably some of us, stores are open, our stores are not open these days. So, do this when you can and when it's safe. But just walk down the street and be curious about what's happening around you. And be curious about the people who are walking by and what's going on. And when you're in conversations through it, just be curious about what people are thinking. Like, you'll find it's a pretty interesting day. And I think we go through a lot of days on autopilot, or a lot of activities on autopilot. And so I think this idea of just opening up to like, I wonder what's going on with that person, or I wonder what's happening with that situation, and just follow that train and see where it goes.
Let's talk about then you mentioned earlier that kind of 5 core skills for intentional learners.
I'll rattle through them quickly, and then we can, just as we did with the mindset, sort of circle back. We synthesize them into 5. The first is setting small, clear goals. And this is specific to goals around learning or goals around your own development. And the reason we said small, clear goals, there's a vast literature on goal setting and what types of goals and how to make goals effective and all of that. What we found is something on the order of like 3 to 6 months where you say, I'm going to develop something very specific and concrete over this period that's relevant and important to me. That is typically highly motivating. It gives you something very concrete to talk about with other people, tell them what you're working on. You can actually see the progress, and then you can reassess at the end of the cycle whether you want to keep working on that thing or you want to pivot in some way to another skill. So when we sort of looked at kind of the whole literature and, should you go all the way down to a week? Should you think about 3 to 5 years? There's a sweet spot in sort of 3 to 6 month learning goals that we've found, and a natural cycle that comes with that. So that's small, clear goals. Next one is great learners are very skilled at removing distractions. And so, we often start when I'm doing like a program or facilitating a session, we'll start by asking people, what might distract you over the course of the next 45 minutes, hour, whatever it is? And what are you going to do about that right now before we start? And it's amazing how much just being thoughtful and intentional about setting aside the time, or making sure you're not going to get pulled away, or in a more macro sense, kind of carving out those times on your calendar, protecting them, making sure you're getting the right support. That's a second skill that great learners have, so that they actually have the time and space to do it and don't get pulled in different directions. Third is actively seeking feedback. So feedback, is something that some people, love, some people hate. I love feedback, and I grew up in a culture where, from my first days here, I was getting a lot of feedback. So I grew up in a very feedback heavy culture at McKinsey. But what we saw was the best learners aren't just open to feedback, receiving feedback, which, as you can imagine, is better than being closed off to it from a learning standpoint, but they actively seek it, and they help other people give them effective feedback. So what does that mean? Good practice would be making sure you've got a monthly check-in with your manager or other people you work with, asking them for feedback, giving them feedback. That's good. And frankly, if everyone did that, we'd be a lot better off. Even great practice is, let's say you and I are going into a meeting, Chris, and you want to work on a specific skill around, I don't know, how you're going to ask questions, rather than just presenting material. You want to work on, we're in a board meeting, you want to work on asking very pointed and clear questions. You let me know that before the meeting and say, hey, Matt, can you watch out for this for me? Now I'm primed to give you effective feedback. And then after the meeting, you follow up and say, hey, I worked on this, or I tried this out. How did it go? That's much more effective feedback than you asking me a month later and me trying to remember back to that meeting, right? So seeking feedback. Fourth is deliberate practice. So practice is something that we don't do enough of in a professional setting all the time. And deliberate practice is a specific type of practice coming out of the work of Anders Ericsson and others, which is think about how practice happens oftentimes in music or sports. You don't practice by just playing a whole game end to end. You're working on a play. Or if you're learning, a new piece on the piano, you're working on just a small section of it, and you're getting feedback, and you're doing it over and over again until it's perfect. That's deliberate practice. And if you can find ways to do that kind of practice, that really speeds up the learning much more than, again, I'll stick on the same example. You're working on presentations. Going to give 10 presentations is helpful. Working on your opening for 60 minutes with someone who can give you feedback and getting it perfect, you're going to grow a lot more that way. And then the last one, and then I'll pause, is regular reflection. So the skill of being able to reflect both in the moment and then on an ongoing basis to sort of say, like, I can practice reflection right now in this conversation. I can say, what messages what was I trying to get out? How am I doing at that? So being able to reflect in the moment, as well as stepping back on a regular basis and reflecting on, am I focused on the right goals? Am I doing the right things? What do I need to adjust? So I know that was a lot, but that's kind of a rundown of the core really habits. Yeah. And, none of us are perfect. None of us do all of them, but the more and more you can do those 5 habits, the faster you're going to accelerate your learning.
Love it. And I could see so much of myself and my team and just people I know in these areas that you mentioned, starting with clear goals. What I did struggle with in the beginning, I used to set these my goals were too lofty. I was focusing on the end goal too much. and then it becomes overwhelming and seems almost unattainable, right? It's like if you're going to do a marathon, you're not thinking about going out on the first day and running a marathon, because you're not gonna do very well on that. And I think that's how a lot of people see sometimes when they set goals. I'm going to run a marathon and try and do it on day one. Whereas for me, what kept me motivated and engaged is setting those small goals, and every time I achieve that, I build momentum and get more and more excited by doing it that way. So I think that's a great way of doing it. You said 3 months. Is that what you recommend? Kind of
3 to 6 months. One shorthand that we sometimes use, just because it's easier to remember than like what are all the 5 habits and everything, is I tell people 3-3-3. 3 goals, 3 months, and tell 3 people that you work with who can help you give you feedback. Mm-hmm. So 3 goals, 3 months, 3 people. And that's a good, simple way to remember how you might have a learning cycle that you refresh every few months.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And then removing distractions, that's a tough one, right? Because I've always, a lot of my learning happens, I always kind of multitask, which I don't know if is a great thing or not. So for example, I'll always listen to content while working out. So I know there's no one's going to distract me because I'm doing my gym workout, but I'm also consuming content. And I feel like actually taking more. Some people may think, well, aren't you distracted because you're working out? Whereas actually for me, I'm super zoned in to what I'm listening to when I'm doing my workout. And I know no one's going to come and interrupt me or if I'm going for a run, or sadly enough, my wife always laughs at me for this, I have a speaker in my shower. So when I'm having a shower, I'll always listen to, I'll plan that evening what I'm going to listen to whilst I'm going through my routine, and I'll have that in the shower so I can take in the content. So even on the ride in to and from work, again, that's a lot of people do the same thing on their commute, right? When they're learning. Yeah. Whereas I find it just really good to combine it with activities. So that's kind of what works for me, but I know there's no distractions.
No, but I think that's great, Chris, because I actually think that, look, I always get a little suspicious when kind of something becomes like a fad or everyone says the same thing. And I noticed that a little bit about multitask. It's a bit like everyone does it, but we're all supposed to say all multitasking is bad and it's ineffective.
Yeah, exactly. I do get that. That's what I hear from a lot of people.
and look, and that's probably in general true, because I think that let's say you're trying to listen to this and get something out of it, but you're also doing your email and you have the phone's ringing and everything. There's science behind you're probably not doing any of those things particularly well.
100%, right? Yeah.
And I think that's clear, and we could say that. But where I think in some cases it may have gone too far is the type of multitasking that you just described, I actually think is extraordinarily effective, at least for me personally as well. And, there's I think it's Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I haven't read it, but I have heard of it.
Yeah, it's a really great book. And he talks about, I forget the term he uses. It's something like active multitasking, but I think he talks about like he runs from his home to his office every day and picks a problem that he's going to turn over in his mind on that run. And invariably he's made big progress.
I do the same thing as well, by the way. When I've got problems, I'll go for a workout. I need to move. For me, I solve problems when I'm moving my body and physically moving.
There's really something to that. And, one thing I do, I also do that. I pick a problem sometimes, or if something's on my mind, I just let it kind of turn over a bit while I'm out for a run. Another one I do is I'll listen to audiobooks while I'm walking. Like if I'm walking to my office, I don't run to my office, but when I used to go into the office, I would walk. And what I found is something about the act of moving through space, I actually recall more, like I retain more. And I can almost now remember back, if you say, when were you reading this book? I'll literally remember, well, when I was walking past this area, he was talking about this. And there's something about the combination of space and movement with memory that's very powerful. So I think, I'll I'll give the okay to those kinds of multitasking, I guess, because I actually think there's something grounded in the practices that you just described and that I and some others do on combining the movement with thinking.
Yeah.
Very future
But
we have
in terms
ahead of
of
us.
the third one, feedback. I was quite lucky that I think I grew up playing sports, so it was quite natural for me to go ask my coach for feedback and get feedback, and vice versa after each game, right? And I'd go out on the ice when I played ice hockey, and Chris, I want you to work on this game, and that was quite a normal thing for me as a kid. So when I went into business, that was quite an easy transition. But obviously, not everyone has that experience or to be able to do it. And as well, and I do think I need to, I do take that for granted, I think, and I need to be a bit more intentional about that. But I think a lot of times, most people don't experience that until they enter the workplace.
Yeah.
In terms of having a conversation, when would you have done that outside of the work environment where you sit down with someone and actually, give feedback and vice versa as well? It's quite some people find that very uncomfortable. That conversation.
A lot of people find it uncomfortable for sure. And what's interesting in particular in what you just said, Chris, is a lot of the strands of research that we tried to pull together for this actually come out of studies from sports, from music, from other domains where how would I say it? It's who the high performers are. Right. And there's a lot of people competing for, and there's actual competition. So you can't just say everyone's good or everyone's winner. You know who's better than others. And there's a whole culture, if you will, around practice and feedback and coaching and all of these things that I think are increasingly making their way into the world of work. But still, to your point, there are a lot of organizations and certainly a lot of individuals for whom feedback is kind of like, I don't want to impose or I don't want to. The biggest barrier that I see is people worrying about the relationship. Like if I give you feedback, is that now you're annoyed and you're going to be annoyed with me, and then that's going to hurt our relationship. And what I often tell people is that if you care about someone, the most important gift you can give them is honesty in terms of how they can improve. I think that's what a caring leader does to me. A not so caring leader, someone who's just trying to keep things calm and stable, doesn't give feedback or just tries to say, oh, everything's good. But I think if you actually care about your people and you want them to improve, you give them feedback. Yeah. And you create a culture where it's acceptable and invited in the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're almost doing them a disservice, aren't you? Or you are doing them a disservice and not giving them feedback. But you also have to be, again, like as a leader or anyone, you have to also be open to the feedback in the first place as well. I realize like the more as a leader, I when the team gives me feedback and they see the way I take it, whether it's good or bad, it makes them understand that, okay, it's okay. If we can give feedback to Chris as CEO, then it's okay for everyone else. It isn't no one's here to try and kind of call each other out. We're all here to support each other and help each other grow. So yeah, I feel like that's super important. You kind of build a culture where you create that psychological safety that people want to do it and they understand the value.
I think that's right. Yeah. And you've got to invite it very actively as a leader, or else you're not going to get it. And some of the best feedback I've gotten in my career has been upward feedback from people who are on my teams, because they're the ones who really see the blind spots. They may not have as much experience as someone who's more senior or whatever it is, but they actually see and feel the effects of your blind spots. And so if you can create an atmosphere in a team where everyone feels open, and I love you use the term psychological safety. I think that's so important. If you have that kind of environment in a team where people do feel like they can speak up and they have a voice, it's a huge accelerant, both for the performance of the team, which is often where a lot of the research on psychological safety goes to it makes teams more highly performing. But I come at it from the view of how do people learn and grow and develop? And I think when you have that kind of environment, it's not just your team's going to be higher performing, but everyone's going to learn more and everyone's going to develop more on a team that works like that.
Where do you see the biggest barrier that people have when it comes to deliberately practicing?
Yeah, I think this may be the hardest one on the list for a lot of people. And I'll explain why. I'll use a different analogy. I'll use a music one. So I didn't play a musical instrument growing up. I didn't have to learn piano or violin or guitar or anything, but I actually started when I turned 30. I took piano lessons for the first time. I bought a piano and I said, I want to actually learn a musical instrument. And what I found, and I only realized this kind of looking back on it now, but to say I was bad at piano is kind of not that interesting of a statement because I was just learning it. To your point, you're a beginner, you have to give yourself. But I was actually, looking back, I realized I had to learn how to learn the piano. I got frustrated with myself when I did something wrong. Like when I was with the team, I wanted to play it all the way through right, and I kind of get stressed out. And what finally, like a teacher taught me is it's like, of course you're bad. Like you're just learning. Like don't worry about that. Worry about these 2 bars and play these 3 notes 5 times. Okay, now my fingers know what to do there. I know how it's supposed to say, okay, now add the 4th and 5th note. Okay, I get that. And it's a little bit of this, but how often do we do that in work, really? Like how often do we break down something that we're working on or that we want to learn into tiny micro practices or segments and say, I'm going to practice that over and over again with someone who's going to coach me and give me feedback. It just doesn't happen. Like you have to, this is where the intention, and by the way, that's hard because you're picking something by definition that you're not that good at yet. And you're doing something that you're not that good at over and over again in front of someone else. And most of us don't like doing that. And so we have the social permission when it's sports or music, or if you're learning how to paint or something like that. But in the work setting, it goes counter to a lot of the beliefs we have about wanting to look good or show up or show that you've already mastered something before you try it. So I think the key on this one is how can you find safe spaces where you can actually work on those things. And this is where the social component is so helpful. Like if you and I, like Chris, you and I partnered up and you said you want to work on X, I want to work on Y, and we both set up 30 minutes, one this week and one next, and 30 minutes this week, you're just going to practice some skill that you want to work on, and I'm going to watch and give you feedback. The next, that would go a long way. And if we had a rhythm of that, but that's where this is so countercultural, I think, to a lot of how jobs work and how people in organizations operate, that you really have to find and make the time to do that and get other people also excited to do it with you.
Mm-hmm. I've seen, whilst you was telling that story, which I completely agree, I was just thinking of past experiences where I've done this in the workplace. And a great example, I think, is sales. So for us, one of the main things we did was practice pitching. So, you know, there will be certain members of the team that need to work on their opening, right? And we would do a team exercise which is obviously quite daunting, which is what you was referring to, where we'd go in a room and each person would do the opening part of the script, and then we'd all listen and give feedback, and everyone would take turns and do it that way. It is nerve-wracking, but after a while, and if that's like a norm, if that's something you do consistently, which we did, so some weeks it was focusing on our urgency stories, other weeks it was on our close, other weeks it was how do we handle objections from customers, right? And we do that as a team. And by doing that, what I found is the team started coaching themselves. So for example, if we was on the sales floor and someone overheard someone having a bit of trouble, they know where they are and they'll automatically start coaching them because we're doing that anyway every morning in our meeting, and it came that way. So I feel like that's a fun one. It's obviously quite daunting when you're in the room, having to read your script in front of everyone. And if anyone's listening right now that's been in sales, you know exactly what I'm talking about as well. But but outside of sales, I can't really think of any other examples, which was quite sad. I was sitting there trying to think of other examples of of that, but I don't think I've ever been involved in any other than sales in that same context.
I think it's a great example. I haven't been involved in many either. And by the way, that example is a great illustration of where formal learning can, like creating those containers where you can do something like that can be really helpful. Because I think rightly so, a lot of people say, most of learning has to happen on the job and in the context of your work. I fully agree with that. But there is a place for actually stepping out of that and having, and to me, it's mostly about this opportunity to practice and to actually try new things in an environment that's safe with other people who can coach you and give you feedback.
In terms of practicing regular reflection, I can't remember how you described it, but you said something about how you're in the moment, but you could also think from above, outside. For me, I have that same experience in selling. So I was, most of my career was selling, and I used to be able to, and I've always found it hard to describe to customers, and you kind of mentioned it. To my employees, that you get to a certain level where you can be on the call doing your, with a customer, having your sales pitch, but there was this other version of Chris which was up here saying, how is this call going? How is this call going? As you're going, well, is it not? What concerns do you think they have, Chris? I'm talking to myself outside of myself. If that makes sense, that sounds like
it sounds, well, I can see why people might think you're crazy when you say that, Chris. But there's actually this concept that was created by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky, and they called it the balcony and the dance. And it's exactly what you said. It's imagine you're in the dance floor. And you're in it, like you're fully in the conversation you're having, the meeting you're in, the sales pitch, whatever it is, you're in it. Can you also mentally put yourself up on the balcony and see what's happening on the dance floor? And that's a mental skill that you can actually cultivate. And they call it the balcony and the dance.
I'm going to use that from now on. That's a lot better way of saying it than what I was trying to explain.
Yeah. The out-of-body experience might sound a little metaphysical to some people. Yeah.
I did develop it. I don't know when it hit though, but it just came. Like I remember being so flustered I could barely keep hold of the conversation. But then it got to a certain point where I knew I was actually, even whilst I'm talking, I'm still also having this conversation up here, which is just so strange. But so I'm already, I don't want to say I'm 10 steps ahead, but I am in some ways. I'm already planning 5-10 minutes ahead of in the conversation based on what's happening. And I realized a lot of successful salespeople that I spoke to, they got it. When I mentioned it to them, they're like, yeah. I thought it was just me. I completely get it. And then some people just look at me like I'm a crazy person as well. So.
And you know what? The key for leaders is to have control over it. Because if you spend all your time up on the balcony and you're that's where the phrase, you're in your own head is also not good. If you're not enough in the dance. And so you have to be able to be kind of fully in there. And then when you want to take a step back and say, okay, what's actually happening here? What's that person thinking over it? Like step back from it and then come back into it and be able to zoom in and out like that. I think that's a more advanced skill. It sounds like you and other good salespeople probably developed it very naturally and intuitively, but it is something that you can actually cultivate and work on as a skill that you practice.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, Matt, if there's kind of one kind of parting takeaway you want to give to the audience, what would that be around kind of the theme we've just been talking about? And then secondly, where can they connect with you if they want to say hello?
Well, one parting is all of us can get better and should get better at the skill of learning. I think this is going to be one of the, whatever field you're in, this is going to be one of the most critical skills to cultivate for yourself over the coming years. And so, if you found even one thing on this conversation that attracted you or that you want to try out, just pick it up and play with it. And, we're at a time of year, it's December when we're recording this, people are thinking about the holidays and then everyone starts thinking about New Year's and what changes they want to make and all of that. And I would encourage people to think about not just a new habit or a new goal or something, but what do you want to learn in the new year, and how can you put into place some of what we talked about today to be more effective at learning it?
And where can they connect with you if they want to reach out?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. Feel free to look me up there, send me a message, and look forward to engaging with a lot of folks on this content. It's very important to me. It's something that I think can make a big difference for a lot of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thank you so much for taking the time out to join me on the show. I love this conversation. And I honestly feel like this is kind of a superpower. For me, everything I have in my career and what I've done and is for actually learning to learn. So many people focus on actually learning things, but not actually the process of learning how to learn as well. And I think I've been quite lucky just from, experience of, being coached through sports, and I picked up some of these skills, without even realizing doing it. But there's so many people that I'm seeing that I'm helping in my own team develop these skills that is having huge impact on their lives as well. And you feel empowered. You don't feel you don't feel helpless or victim to circumstance, because you can pivot and adapt and thrive in any environment when you have that. And that's super empowering when you know that and you can do it as well. So thank you so much for taking time out to join us. If you're listening and you enjoyed the episode, please like, comment, share. Tagging colleagues, if you're on LinkedIn right now, tagging colleagues that you feel will gain value from the episode. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, Matt, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Bye-bye.